Imagine for a moment that you're watching the most powerful nation on Earth slowly crumble, not because of armies or bombs or weapons of war, but because of something far more delicate, a plant, a single, beautiful flowering plant. Not tanks, not soldiers, not military strategy. Just a flower that would eventually bring an entire civilization to its knees. This isn't a story from a fantasy book or an imaginary world. This is the true, historical account of how opium destroyed China's greatest empire, and how the consequences of that destruction continue to ripple through our world today. Let yourself sink deeper into your comfortable place. Get your pillows just right. Pull that blanket a little closer. This is a story worth taking your time with, one that unfolds slowly, like smoke curling through still air. The kind of story that makes you think about the weight of history and the fragility of even the greatest civilizations. Now, let's travel back together to the Qing dynasty in China, to the year 1800. Picture this with me. Dawn is breaking over Canton Harbor in southern China, and you're waking up in a small room you've rented near the busy waterfront. The air around you is thick and humid. Through your window drifts the overwhelming smell of salt water mixed with exotic spices and the unmistakable scent of humanity. Outside, you can hear the constant hum of activity. Merchants shouting to one another, wooden vessels creaking against the docks, metal clanging as goods are loaded and unloaded. Your bed isn't the comfortable memory foam mattress you're used to. Instead, you're lying on a simple wooden platform with just a thin mat beneath you, doing almost nothing to ease the ache in your back. It's already hot, and the humidity makes your clothes stick to your skin. You haven't even gotten up yet, and you're already feeling the weight of the tropical climate pressing down on you. You're in Canton, the only Chinese port where foreign merchants are permitted to trade, and let me tell you, if there's any place on Earth where money is flowing through the streets like rivers, where fortunes are being made and lost with every transaction, where the very air seems to shimmer with possibility and wealth, it's here. This city is the financial heartbeat of the world in 1800. Now, you might be thinking to yourself that Europe and America were the richest, most powerful places during this time. That's probably what your history textbooks told you, and it makes sense that you'd believe it. But that assumption would be completely wrong. China, in 1800, was so economically dominant, so far ahead of every other nation on Earth, that it produced more than 1/3 of everything manufactured on the entire planet. Think about that number for a moment. One country, 1/3 of everything. To put it in perspective for modern times, imagine if the United States, Japan, and Germany combined their economies into one single superpower. That's roughly how dominant China was. European merchants arriving in Canton weren't coming as equals or as conquerors. They came as desperate supplicants, begging for the privilege of trading with the Chinese. And the response from the Chinese emperor? Essentially, they smiled politely and said, "No thank you. We're quite fine without anything you have to offer." The emperor in Beijing viewed all Western kingdoms as barbarian states, literally calling them that. Uncivilized places with nothing of any value to contribute to the Middle Kingdom, as China called itself. But surely, you might wonder, these Western nations had invented wonderful things that would impress the Chinese. Well, from China's perspective, they'd already invented pretty much everything worth inventing. Paper, Chinese invention. Printing, also Chinese. Gunpowder, Chinese. The compass, Chinese as well. They created porcelain so fine and delicate that you could practically see light through it. They produced silk so luxurious that European nobility would spend their entire fortunes just to own a few bolts of it. Everything of value, everything that mattered, all of it came from China. When foreign merchants arrived in Canton to trade, they weren't treated as business partners or equals. They were barely tolerated at all, and the entire trading system was carefully designed to keep them in their place and reinforce Chinese superiority. As you watch Western merchants arrive at the docks, a local Chinese official explains how everything works. Listen carefully, he says to you. This is how we do things here. Foreigners, you, are only permitted to trade in Canton, nowhere else in our vast empire. You will live in specific buildings outside the city walls that we call factories, though they're not factories in the sense you might know them. They're simply trading houses. You will not bring your wives or families here. You will not learn our language. You absolutely cannot travel into the Chinese interior to see our lands or our people. And most importantly, you will only conduct trade through the approved Chinese merchants. We call them the Hong merchants. Do you understand? The most powerful of these Hong merchants is a man named Haokwa, and this person is breathtakingly wealthy. We're not just talking about successful businessman rich or millionaire rich. We're talking about being potentially the richest person on the entire planet. His personal fortune is estimated at around $26 million, which might not sound absolutely staggering until you consider what that means in today's money. We're talking multiple billions of dollars. This man had entire rooms just filled with silver. During a fire that broke out in 1822, eyewitnesses described something that sounds almost impossible. Rivers of silver flowing through the streets as Haokwa's vaults literally melted in the intense heat. Rivers of silver, actual rivers. You stand at the harbor and watch as a British East India Company ship unloads its cargo. You spot Haokwa directing his army of clerks and assistants, dressed in the finest elegant silk robes, his hands clasped thoughtfully behind his back as he observes crates and crates of silver being carried off the ships. The trading system, as a nearby merchant explains to you, is actually quite straightforward. Western traders bring silver, lots and lots of silver, and in exchange, the Chinese provide tea, silk, and porcelain. It seems like a simple enough arrangement on the surface. Europeans and Americans desperately want Chinese luxury goods. The obsession with Chinese tea in England has become almost religious in its intensity. People can't get enough of it. The Chinese, meanwhile, have no interest in anything Western traders have to offer. So the Westerners solve the problem the only way they can. They pay in silver, mountains of it. But here's where the real problem emerges for the Western traders. This arrangement, this constant flow of silver leaving their treasuries, is absolutely draining them dry. The merchants grow increasingly frustrated. "We can't keep doing this," one British trader says to his companions. "England's running out of silver. We're hemorrhaging money. Every chest we send to China, every payment we make, it just disappears into Chinese treasuries. We're making money back home selling the goods we import, but the trade imbalance is completely unsustainable. We need something, anything, that the Chinese will actually want to buy from us." You can see the desperation on their faces. They're trapped in a system that makes them money but slowly impoverishes their home countries. The math simply doesn't work long term. They need a solution, and they need it urgently. They need to find something, anything, that Chinese people will purchase in such large quantities that it reverses the flow of silver. And that's exactly when everything changes. One evening you notice an unusual ship anchored in the harbor. It flies no flags. The local Chinese seem to be deliberately avoiding it, giving it a wide berth. Yet small boats occasionally slip out to it under the cover of darkness, moving quietly and carefully. You approach a merchant you've befriended and ask about it. Turkish and Indian opium, he tells you in a low voice. Technically illegal in China, but he shrugs, a gesture that says everything. The rules are there, but they're not exactly enforced with much enthusiasm. Opium itself wasn't new to China. It had been present in the country for centuries, used primarily for medical purposes. When people used it traditionally, they would eat it or drink it as a tincture to help with pain or various illnesses. But something fundamental changed when Europeans introduced the practice of smoking it. Everything shifted with that single innovation. "Come on," your merchant friend says. "I'll show you something." He leads you through the crowded, winding streets of Canton, moving deeper into the city, away from the waterfront. After several minutes of walking, you arrive at what looks like an ordinary tea house, nothing remarkable about it from the outside. But the moment you step inside, everything changes. The air is thick, almost solid, with sweet, acrid smoke. It hangs in layers, creating a hazy blue atmosphere that seems to glow in the dim lamplight. On wooden platforms covered with bamboo mats, you see dozens of people lying down. Their eyes are half closed, their expressions peaceful and distant. Attendants move quietly around the room, preparing pipes for customers. The pipes themselves are beautiful objects, long stems decorated with intricate carvings and ornate metal bowls. You watch as one attendant carefully heats a small ball of dark, sticky opium over a flame until it begins to bubble. Then he places it in the pipe bowl for a waiting customer. One puff, and your troubles fade away, your merchant friend explains quietly. 2 puffs, and you're floating. 3, and you're in paradise. You're witnessing something remarkable here, the beginning of something that will eventually become catastrophic. At this exact moment in history, opium smoking is still primarily confined to the wealthy elite, government officials, rich merchants, men of leisure and means. It's a luxury, a status symbol, something that marks you as someone important and successful. But that's about to change in ways that nobody can fully predict or imagine. Your merchant friend leans in closer, his voice dropping even lower. The British East India Company has enormous opium plantations all across Bengal, he tells you. They're producing thousands of chests of this stuff every single year, and guess where all of it is headed? He nods toward the harbor outside. A single chest of opium contains approximately 140 pounds of the drug. In 1800, around 4,500 chests were being smuggled into China annually. That's roughly 630,000 pounds of opium, and the demand is growing steadily, month after month. What's particularly important to understand is that this isn't a stable situation. The following morning, back at the harbor, you witness a level of activity that's almost frantic. Goods are moving in all directions. Silver is flowing into China. Luxury goods are flowing out to waiting ships. It's the most successful trading arrangement in the entire world, but it's balanced precariously on a knife's edge. One strong wind could topple everything. As you watch the organized chaos, a group of British merchants stands apart from the others, talking intently together. You recognize one of them, William Jardine, a former ship surgeon who turned himself into a merchant. Standing next to him is his business partner, James Matheson. These 2 Scotsmen will eventually found Jardine, Matheson and Company, which will become one of the most profitable drug smuggling operations in recorded history. The decisions they make, the strategies they develop, will reshape the world. The Chinese want to keep us confined to Canton, you overhear Jardine saying to his associates. They think they can control us, keep us in their trading houses like prisoners. But we have something they don't have. We have fast clipper ships, vessels that can deliver opium all along the coast faster than their patrol boats can possibly intercept us. We can bypass their entire system. You're witnessing, in real time, the planning of what would become the most successful drug smuggling enterprise in human history. And the Chinese government has absolutely no idea what's coming. They're blissfully unaware that their entire trading system is about to be undermined. Back in the trading factories, you observe the complex dance of commerce playing out every day. The Chinese Hong merchants find themselves in a difficult position. Yes, they're immensely wealthy, fabulously rich by any standard, but they're caught between the demands of the imperial government in Beijing and the foreign traders they're forced to deal with. They're responsible for the foreigners' behavior. They're expected to ensure that all taxes are paid and all regulations are followed. It's a precarious position that will eventually become untenable. Someone comments to you about Hauke's situation. He's clever, they say. He's investing much of his enormous fortune overseas through his American partners. He doesn't trust the imperial officials not to eventually seize his wealth. Smart move on his part, because the system that's made him the richest man on earth, is about to come crashing down like a house of cards. Later that day, you receive an extraordinary honor. You're invited to a banquet hosted by Haokwa himself or his American trading partners. This is a rare privilege, something that's extended to very few foreigners. His mansion is a vision of almost unimaginable luxury. Exquisite gardens filled with rare plants, priceless antiques from centuries past, and a banquet that stretches on for hours with dozens of exotic dishes prepared by the finest cooks money can hire. 15 courses, an American merchant whispers to you in amazement. Bird's nest soup, shark fins, pigeon eggs. This single feast probably costs more than most people in this city will earn in an entire year. What's fascinating about watching this evening unfold is the genuine relationship that has developed between Haokwa and these American traders. They've built something beyond mere business. There's real friendship here, actual mutual respect that transcends the commercial transactions. The Americans help manage Haokwa's overseas investments, and in return, he gives them preferential treatment in Canton. It's a relationship based on trust in a world often driven by greed and deception. As the evening winds down, and the last courses are cleared away, Haokwa raises a glass to propose a toast. To prosperity, he says warmly, and to friendship between our peoples. Everyone drinks, but there's tension in the air beneath the celebration, a current of unspoken worry. The Americans know what's coming with the opium trade, and they're conflicted about their role in it. One of them, Robert Bennett Forbes, will later write to his wife back in America, expressing his internal struggle. "I made my first fortune by the same," he'll write, referring to opium, while acknowledging that the drug was demoralizing the minds and destroying the bodies of our customers and draining the country of money. The merchants are already getting rich, very rich indeed, but they have no idea how much wealthier they're about to become, or how much more destructive this trade is about to be to the society they're operating in. That night, back in your small, uncomfortable room, you lie on your wooden platform bed while the sounds of the harbor drift through your window. You've witnessed Canton at the absolute height of its glory, the center of global trade, the place where the world's wealth flows through the hands of merchants like Haokwa. But something fundamental is shifting beneath the surface. The balance of power that has favored China for centuries, that has kept China at the center of the world, is beginning to tilt. The changes will be gradual at first, almost imperceptible, but they're coming. In the next decade, the amount of opium smuggled into China will increase tenfold. The drug will spread from the elite to ordinary people across the entire empire. Silver, instead of flowing into China, will begin flowing out at an alarming rate. An emperor in Beijing, thousands of miles away from Canton, will finally realize, though perhaps too late, that his great empire faces an existential threat. Not from armies or navies in the traditional sense, but from something far more subtle and insidious, a flower, the milky sap of the poppy plant, processed into a sticky resin that produces the most intense euphoria humans have ever experienced. As you drift towards sleep, the sweet, sickly smell of opium smoke drifts in through your window. All around you, in hidden rooms and behind closed doors throughout the city, more and more Chinese people are taking up the pipe. The addiction is spreading like a virus, and with it, the seeds of destruction for the world's greatest empire are being quietly sown. Not with a bang or dramatic fanfare, but with the soft, almost gentle hiss of opium smoke being drawn slowly through an ornate pipe. In the moonlight, ship after ship continues to arrive in Canton Harbor. On their manifests, it lists silver, cotton, and wool. But in hidden compartments below deck, thousands of balls of opium are carefully packed, ready to be sold to eager buyers. Each chest of opium is stamped with the symbol of the British East India Company, the very institution that had been granted a monopoly on trade by the British Crown. That same company is now, essentially, the world's biggest drug dealer. You close your eyes, the humidity making sleep difficult, thinking about how something as simple as a trade imbalance and a flowering plant is about to change the course of human history. Tomorrow, Canton will wake up and continue its business, completely unaware that the entire system is about to collapse. The people have no idea that this golden age of Chinese prosperity is coming to an end. And it all starts here, in this harbor, with a pipe, with smoke, with dreams, with addiction, with opium. The morning fog hangs thick over Canton Harbor as a new day begins. But now, 10 years have passed since you first arrived in this bustling port city. It's now 1830, and everything has changed. Everything. What you're about to witness isn't just the story of a drug taking hold of a nation. It's the tale of how the world's economic order flipped completely upside down in the span of a single generation. The entire global system has been inverted, silver. For centuries, generations upon generations, silver has flowed into China like a mighty, inexorable river. It's been the lifeblood of the empire's economy, the foundation of its wealth and power. But now, something catastrophic has happened. That river has reversed its course. Instead of flowing in, it's hemorrhaging out, bleeding away at a rate that would give any serious economist a heart attack. The wealth is leaving, and it's leaving fast. You're probably thinking to yourself, how bad could it really be? I mean, it's just some people smoking in back rooms, right? How destructive could that really be to an entire nation? The answer will surprise you. The impact is far, far worse than anyone could have imagined. Let me paint you a picture of what China looks like now. You're walking through a narrow alley in Canton. The smell hits you first. That distinctive, sweet, acrid scent of opium smoke that now seems to permeate every single corner of the city, every street, every building. You step inside what looks like an ordinary tea house from the outside. But inside, the scene is anything but ordinary. The room is dim, illuminated only by small oil lamps that flicker and cast dancing shadows on the walls. The air is so thick with bluish smoke that it hangs in distinct layers, one above the other, like clouds in the sky. On wooden platforms covered with bamboo mats lie dozens of people. Dozens, not just the wealthy merchants and officials you saw a decade ago. Everyone, literally everyone. Government clerks lie here, their official caps set aside as they take long, deep draws from their pipes. Dock workers, their muscles wasted from months of choosing the pipe over food, lie next to them. In the corner, a woman who once ran a successful silk shop stares vacantly at the ceiling, lost in her own world. A Buddhist monk, still wearing his saffron robes, lies motionless nearby, lost to the drug. What happened here? You whisper to the attendant who's preparing a pipe for a new customer who's just walked in the door. He simply shrugs, as if this is all routine now, as if what you're witnessing is completely normal. Cheaper opium, much cheaper now. Lots of it. Anyone can afford it now. That's what happened. And he's absolutely right. In 1820, about 4,500 chests of opium were being smuggled into China annually. That was already a lot. But by 1830, that number had exploded, nearly quadrupled, to almost 20,000 chests. We're talking about 2.8 million pounds of opium flowing into China every single year. To help you visualize this, imagine 2,800 tons of drugs. That's roughly the weight of 500 elephants' worth of opium entering China each year. And the growth isn't stopping. By 1838, it will reach 40,000 chests. That's 5.6 million pounds of opium flowing into a single country annually. Outside the opium den, you pass a small group of British merchants huddled together in serious conversation. You recognize one of them, William Jardine, the man you saw a decade earlier planning his smuggling operations. He's no longer just a merchant. He's now become one of the wealthiest men in all of Asia, his fortune growing exponentially year after year. The new clipper ships are magnificent, Jardine is saying to his associates, clearly pleased with himself. 32 days from Kolkata to Linton Island. The Chinese patrol boats can't touch us. They're too slow, too outdated. His partner, James Matheson, nods in agreement. We've got warehouses full on Linton Island now. The local Chinese smugglers take it from there and distribute it inland. It's a perfect system. Linton Island, just outside Chinese territorial waters, has become an offshore base for the entire opium trade. Western ships would anchor there, safely beyond the reach of Chinese law, and transfer their illegal cargo to fast Chinese smuggling boats that would deliver it up the Pearl River to Canton and beyond. It's exactly like a DoorDash service for drugs if you think about it. An innovative distribution network that gets the product to customers quickly and efficiently. But the real genius of the Western opium merchants isn't just their smuggling network. It's how they solve their original problem, the devastating trade imbalance. Here's how the entire system works. British merchants grow opium in India, which is controlled by the British East India Company, ship it to China, and sell it to Chinese smugglers in exchange for silver. Then they use that silver to buy Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. The trade deficit has been completely flipped. Now silver is flowing out of China at an alarming accelerating rate. The economic consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. You're present at a meeting between Haokwa and several other Hong merchants. The stress on their faces is evident, etched into every line. They look like men carrying an unbearable weight. The price of silver has doubled in just 10 years, one merchant says grimly, his voice heavy with resignation. Our currency is collapsing. Everything costs twice as much. Our currency is worth half what it was. Haokwa nods, his expression grave and deeply worried. The provincial government demands that we stop the opium trade, yet many of their own officials are the biggest customers. They're addicted themselves. My cousin's entire village near Suzhou has fallen to the pipe. The fields lie untended. No one works anymore. Everyone is smoking. Another merchant adds quietly, the fields lie untended. The workshops sit empty. People are selling everything they own, their tools, their furniture, their land, everything, just to buy more opium. How long can this continue? How long can any society function when its people are willing to sell everything for a drug? As you walk through Canton, you notice something that troubles you deeply. The city seems poorer than a decade ago, despite all the trade, despite all the activity, despite the constant movement of goods and ships. There's a sense of decay pervading everything. Buildings that were once pristine are now crumbling. Paint is peeling. Structures are falling into disrepair. People who once seemed prosperous now appear gaunt and desperate. The vitality seems to be draining out of the city. What's happening to Canton? You ask a local shopkeeper, your concern evident. He glances around nervously before answering, as if worried about being overheard. Silver leaves, he says simply. It flows out constantly. Nothing comes in to replace it. Even the provincial officials are struggling to collect taxes now. People have nothing left to give. The economic impact is truly devastating. China has been operating on a silver standard, meaning its currency was backed by silver. As silver flows out of the country to pay for opium, payment for a product that's being consumed and doesn't create lasting value, the value of money plummets and inflation soars. Imagine if the US dollar lost half its value in just a few years. That's exactly what the Chinese are experiencing. Prices are rising on everything. The purchasing power of ordinary people's savings is evaporating. The sun is setting as you make your way to a different part of the city, away from the harbor and the foreign factories. Here you find a modest home where a family is gathering for their evening meal. The tension is palpable, hanging in the air like fog. Father hasn't come home again, a young woman tells her mother as she sets out bowls of rice on the table. Her voice is tinged with sadness and frustration. He's at the smoking house, the mother says quietly, her face lined with worry and resignation. Your brother too, the daughter says. 3 days now. He sold his fishing nets yesterday. Everything. What will he do when he has nothing left to sell? How will he fish? The mother has no answer. She simply stares at her rice, her shoulders slumped. This scene, this exact family drama, is playing out in countless homes across China now. Addiction is tearing families apart, destroying livelihoods. undermining everything that holds a society together. The social fabric is unraveling thread by thread. Children are going hungry because their fathers are spending all their money on opium. Women are becoming widows in all but name, their husbands lost to the pipe. Meanwhile, across town in a different part of the city, American merchants are calculating their profits at Russell and Company, one of the largest American trading firms in Canton. They're doing very well indeed. We cleared $200,000 on the last shipment, one merchant says, checking his ledger carefully. Turkish opium isn't quite as good quality as the Indian variety, but the margins are better. We make more profit per chest. Another merchant looks troubled by the conversation. My father writes from Boston asking if the trade is moral. He's heard the missionaries' reports about the suffering here, about families destroyed, about addiction spreading like a plague. Well, Warren Delano made a fortune in this trade, the first replies, referring to the grandfather of future U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Nobody questions his morality back in America. He's not considered a drug dealer. He's considered a successful businessman. And he's not wrong. The fortunes being made in the China trade, much of it directly from opium, are financing the Industrial Revolution back in America and Britain. The wealth from opium is funding railways, factories, universities, and libraries. Some of America's most respectable families, families that are pillars of their communities, built their fortunes on the back of the opium trade. Their descendants are wearing the clothes that opium money bought. They're reading in libraries that opium money built. Look, the merchant continues, if we don't do it, the British will just take our share. At least we're bringing some of the wealth back to America. At least American cities benefit. It's the classic rationalization that humans use to justify almost anything. If I don't do it, someone else will. Might as well be me. Might as well be us. Back at the harbor the next morning, you notice something new in the atmosphere. Tension. Chinese soldiers are patrolling more aggressively than before. Officials are inspecting ships with greater scrutiny and suspicion. Something has shifted. The emperor in Beijing has finally noticed what's happening, explains a local guide you've befriended. But it's too late, far too late. Too many people are involved in the trade now. Too many officials are addicted themselves. You can't fight a system when the people who are supposed to be enforcing the laws against it are themselves addicted to the very drug they're supposed to be stopping. This was the terrible irony that no one had anticipated. By the time the imperial government in Beijing fully understood the extent of the crisis unfolding in the provinces, many of the officials tasked with solving it were themselves addicted to opium. Imagine asking alcoholics to enforce prohibition. That's essentially what was happening. The system was eating itself from the inside out. You wander into a tea house near the waterfront. The customers here are a mix of locals and foreign merchants. In one corner you overhear two Chinese scholars in animated conversation about the situation. The barbarians bring poison and take our silver, one says bitterly, his frustration evident. And our own people helped them do it. Our own officials facilitated it. What do you expect? Replies his companion, shaking his head sadly. When I was a district magistrate in Jiangsu, my superior was smoking 3 pipes a day. 3. How can we enforce the law when the law enforcers themselves are addicted? How can we stop something when the people in power are benefiting from it? The first scholar leans forward urgently. Do you know what I heard? In some villages in the interior they're growing poppies now. Our own people are growing the poison on our own soil. It's spreading inland. It's not just a coastal problem anymore. This is a new and deeply frightening development. Domestic opium production is beginning in China itself, particularly in the southwestern provinces. It's still small compared to imports, but it's a sign of how deeply the opium economy has penetrated into Chinese society. The virus has gone systemic. Across the room, a group of British merchants are having drinks and discussing the situation with casual confidence. They blame us. One gestures toward the Chinese scholars. But it's their corrupt officials who allow the trade to flourish. We're just businessmen meeting demand. Exactly, his companion agrees. Nobody forces them to smoke. It's their choice. Free will, personal responsibility, their choice, a third merchant repeats, though he doesn't meet anyone's eyes as he says it. The hypocrisy is stunning, even as he speaks it aloud. Back in Britain, opium is regulated and available only as medicine. The idea of opium dens operating openly in London would have been absolutely scandalous. The British public would have been outraged, demanding immediate action. Yet these same merchants who would have been horrified by such establishments in their own country are perfectly happy to profit from them here in China. They've compartmentalized their morality, allowing themselves to do things abroad that they would never tolerate at home. As evening falls, you find yourself near the waterfront again. A small Chinese smuggling boat is preparing to leave, loaded with goods and supplies. You approach a nearby porter and ask him a question. Where are they going? To meet the foreign ships anchored at Linton Island, he explains casually. They'll bring back opium, lots of it. Aren't they afraid of getting caught? Of being punished? The porter laughs, a real, genuine laugh. The patrol boats? The captains are paid to look the other way. If one captain decides to actually enforce the law and stop the smuggling, the smugglers just wait until his shift ends or he's replaced. It's understood. It's how things work now. That night, from the window of your room, you watch as dozens of small boats slip out of the harbor under cover of darkness. They'll return before dawn, laden with chests of opium that will make their way to dens and private homes throughout Canton and the surrounding countryside. The system is operating smoothly, like a well-oiled machine. Nobody's trying to hide it anymore. Everyone knows. Everyone participates. The next morning brings news. An imperial edict has arrived from Beijing. The emperor is demanding stronger action against the opium trade. He's finally acknowledged the crisis and is ordering a crackdown. You're in a tea house when you overhear local officials discussing it. Their voice is low and worried. The emperor doesn't understand the situation here. One official says with resignation, "If we truly cracked down, if we actually enforced a ban on opium smoking, half the city would rise up in withdrawal pains. People would literally suffer. And where would we get the money to pay our troops? Our tax collection is already down by half because of the silver crisis." Another official adds, "We're trapped. If we stop the trade, we cause immediate physical suffering for thousands of addicts and economic collapse. If we allow it to continue, we watch the country's wealth drain away and its people succumb to addiction. There's no good option. Every choice leads to disaster." This was the central problem that the imperial government faced. The opium trade had become so entrenched, so fundamental to the economy of southern China, that stopping it would cause immediate severe pain for both individuals and the entire system. Yet allowing it to continue meant watching the country's wealth drain away and its people succumb to addiction. It was an impossible dilemma with no solution that didn't cause suffering. Later that day, you happen upon a Western doctor treating patients in a small clinic near the foreign factories. Most of his patients are Chinese, many showing the advanced symptoms of opium addiction. The doctor is clearly frustrated and deeply troubled by what he's witnessing. The physical effects are devastating, he tells you between patients, wiping his brow. Chronic constipation, loss of appetite, wasting of the muscles, but the worst part is the dependency. Once addicted, the body simply can't function without the drug. The withdrawal is absolutely excruciating. People experience vomiting, severe diarrhea, unbearable pain. Can they recover? You ask, hoping for some positive news. The doctor sighs heavily. Some do, with proper care and support, but most don't have access to that kind of help, and the temptation to relapse is everywhere. One whiff of that smoke, one friend offering a pipe, and they're back into it. The addiction is powerful beyond imagination. As night falls on Canton once again, the cycle begins again. Smuggling boats slip out to meet the foreign ships anchored safely beyond Chinese territorial waters. Opium dens fill with customers seeking escape from a reality that grows more unbearable with each passing year. Silver changes hands, gradually flowing out of China, coin by coin, tael by tael. The empire is slowly draining itself of wealth. In a luxurious merchant house, Haukwa sits alone, writing letters to his American partners about his overseas investments. Even he, the richest man in Canton, can see what's coming. The system that made him wealthy is beginning to collapse. He's moving his money out of China while he still can, protecting himself while he abandons his own people to their fate. This is how empires truly fall. Not all at once in a great battle with clear winners and losers, but gradually, almost invisibly, as their wealth drains away and their people lose the will or ability to work, to create, to build. The opium crisis isn't just affecting individuals, it's eating away at the very foundations of Chinese society itself. As you drift off to sleep that night, the sounds of Canton seem different than they did a decade ago. There's an edge of desperation to the city now. The confident hum of the world's greatest trading port has been replaced by something more frantic, more unstable, more desperate. And in Beijing, thousands of miles away in the imperial palace, an emperor sits reading reports of declining tax revenue, increasing addiction, and silver flowing out of his empire like water through a broken dam. Soon, very soon, he will decide that enough is enough. He will send one of his most capable officials to Canton with orders to end the opium trade by whatever means necessary. But by then, it might already be too late. The damage has been done, the addiction has taken hold, the stage has been set for a confrontation that will change China and the world forever. The opium wars are coming. The weather has turned in Canton. Storm clouds gather over the harbor, dark and heavy with meaning. A new official's procession winds through the streets, and the entire city seems to hold its breath. It's March 1839, and everything is about to change. Everything. Word spreads through the city like wildfire carried on the wind. Lin Zexu has arrived. Lin Zexu, the emperor's chosen one, his most trusted official, sent with a single mission that everyone understands: end the opium trade. By whatever means necessary, no compromise, no negotiation, just the end of the trade. You're standing in the crowd as his procession passes through the streets. Banners wave in the wind. Drums beat rhythmically. Imperial guards clear the way for the official's passage, moving people aside with a mix of respect and intimidation. At the center of it all is a sedan chair carried by 8 strong men. Through the silk curtains that drape the chair, you catch a brief glimpse of the man who's about to shake the foundations of the greatest drug trade in history. Commissioner Lin isn't what you expected. He's not a fierce warrior or an imposing military figure. He's a scholar, a 54-year-old civil servant known throughout the empire for his incorruptible character and brilliant mind. There's something in his expression, though, something that stops you cold. There's steel-hard determination in his eyes, a commitment to his mission that sends chills down your spine despite the warm afternoon. He looks ordinary in many ways, but there's something about him that commands respect. He looks ordinary, whispers someone next to you, echoing your own thoughts. But they say even the most corrupt officials tremble when he arrives in their district. Another voice responds. The emperor chose well, a third person adds. If anyone can stop the foreign poison, it's Lin. If anyone can end this crisis, it's him. The crowd's reaction is mixed. There's hope, genuine hope, mingling with fear, because everyone in Canton knows what's coming now. Confrontation, real confrontation. After decades of allowing the opium trade to flourish, after years of looking the other way while foreign merchants smuggled in their poison, the imperial government has finally decided to act. And not with half measures or easily bribed local officials. This time they've sent their very best. They've sent their most trusted, most incorruptible official. They're serious. Later that day you're sipping tea in a shop near the foreign factories when you overhear British merchants discussing the new arrival. Their tone has shifted. There's real concern now. This Lin fellow has quite the reputation, one merchant says nervously, fidgeting with his cup. They call him the iron-handed commissioner. I've heard stories. Bah, scoffs another merchant dismissively. We've seen these crusaders before. Local officials full of moral righteousness and determination, but a few well-placed bribes, a little money in the right hands, and they look the other way like all the rest. It always works. The first merchant shakes his head. I've heard this one's different. The stories are consistent, incorruptible, honest, and he has the emperor's full backing. That's what worries me. What's the worst he can do? Asks a third merchant with more confidence than conviction. They need our trade too badly to risk any real action. They need the tax revenue. They need the foreign exchange. They can't afford to push us too far. Oh, how wrong they are. How catastrophically, completely wrong they'd turn out to be. Within days of Lin's arrival, he makes his intentions crystal clear in ways that cannot be misinterpreted. He orders the arrest of Chinese opium dealers throughout the city, hundreds of them. He shuts down opium dens across Canton with swift, decisive action. He demands that foreign merchants surrender all their opium stocks immediately, with no negotiation and no extensions. The foreign community is stunned. This isn't the usual posturing and bluffing they've grown accustomed to over the years. This is deadly serious. This is different. You're near the harbor when you witness something that shocks everyone present. Local officials are leading a prominent Chinese opium dealer to the public execution ground. The man is weeping, begging for mercy, pleading with the officials for his life. But there is no mercy to be found. None. Commissioner Lin has decided to make examples of the major dealers. Public examples. Brutal examples. Holy, mutters an American merchant standing nearby, his face pale. He actually executed him, right in front of the factories. He didn't hesitate, he didn't negotiate, he just executed him. This wasn't just for show or for intimidation. Within 2 weeks of his arrival, Commissioner Lin has arrested over 1,000 Chinese dealers and confiscated thousands of opium pipes. Addicts are rounded up and forced into improvised treatment centers. The city is in turmoil, chaos, panic. The biggest shock comes when Lin addresses the foreign merchants directly, laying out his ultimatum in clear, unmistakable language. He gives them 3 days to surrender all opium in their possession. 3 days. After 3 days, they will face severe consequences. To drive his point home and make it absolutely clear that he's not bluffing, he surrounds the factories with Chinese troops. Soldiers armed and ready. It's a show of force that cannot be ignored or dismissed. He can't be serious. You overhear one British merchant say to another, his voice shaking slightly. There must be 20,000 chests in the harbor, worth millions of pounds. Sterling. That's a fortune. He can't possibly expect us to just surrender all of it. Jardine got out just in time, his companion replies with resignation. Sailed for London last month. Left Dent and the rest of us to deal with this mess. The smart money left when they saw Lin coming. That evening you find yourself in a meeting of the foreign merchants. The atmosphere is tense, electric with worry and anger. Charles Elliot, the British Superintendent of Trade, is trying to maintain calm, but panic is bubbling just beneath the surface. Everyone can feel it. Gentlemen, I advise compliance, Elliot says, his voice steady but his eyes betraying concern. Commissioner Lin appears quite determined. Quite serious. I don't believe he's bluffing. Surrender millions in property, one merchant shouts, his frustration boiling over. Without compensation. It's robbery, outright theft. Better than the alternative, another merchant counters urgently. He's threatened to cut off our trade entirely. Perhaps worse. Perhaps imprisonment. Perhaps worse than that. I don't know what he's capable of, and I don't want to find out. The room erupts into argument. Some merchants want to stand firm, believing Lin is bluffing, that he won't actually follow through with his threats. Others are ready to give in, fearing for their lives and their livelihoods. There's no consensus. There are only fear and disagreement. What these merchants don't realize is that Lin has come prepared for resistance. He's studied the foreigners carefully, trying to understand how they think, what motivates them, what they value. He's even written a letter to Queen Victoria herself, appealing to her sense of morality and justice. He's trying to reach across the gulf between civilizations and appeal to shared human values. I've heard that in your honorable country, Lin writes in his letter to the British Queen. The smoking of opium is strictly forbidden by law. Since it is not permitted in your own country, then surely you should not allow it to be passed on to harm other countries. How can you bear to make profit from harming others? How can you justify this? What would your own people think? The irony is absolutely staggering. The British government strictly prohibits recreational opium use at home in Britain. It's illegal, yet simultaneously Britain is the world's largest drug dealer, flooding China with the very substance they've forbidden their own people from using. It's one of the great hypocrisies of history. But Lin's letter won't change anything. The deadline passes. The foreign merchants have not complied. Lin makes his next move, and it's devastating in its effectiveness. All Chinese servants are ordered to leave the foreign factories immediately. Food and water supplies are cut off completely. The foreign community finds itself under siege, trapped, surrounded. This is an outrage, bellows a British merchant as he paces inside the increasingly squalid factory compound, the initial shock wearing off and being replaced by anger. They can't treat British subjects this way. This is a violation of our rights. This is unlawful imprisonment. But Lin is just getting started. He intensifies the pressure, making it absolutely clear that the foreigners will not be allowed to leave until they surrender their opium. Days pass, then weeks. The conditions inside the compound deteriorate. Food becomes scarce. Sanitation becomes a problem. The foreigners are desperate and frightened. After 6 tense weeks of standoff, 6 weeks of mounting pressure and psychological warfare, Charles Elliot makes a fateful decision. He orders all British merchants to surrender their opium to him personally, promising them that the British government will eventually compensate them for their loss. It's a deal made under duress, but it's a deal nonetheless. The merchants comply. Elliot takes possession of the opium and hands it over to Commissioner Lin. The numbers are staggering. 20,283 chests of opium. That's approximately 1,300 tons of the drug. The street value is roughly £2 million sterling. In today's money, that's roughly £250 million. £250 million worth of illegal drugs, seized in one operation. Now comes the most dramatic moment of all. Instead of keeping the opium or selling it, Lin orders its complete destruction. Complete, total, absolute. You're among the witnesses to what happens next. At a beach near the village of Human, just outside Canton, workers construct huge trenches lined with stone. The opium chests are brought in by the hundreds, transported by boats and carts. Under Lin's watchful eye, watching to make sure every detail is done correctly, workers break open each chest, dump the contents into the trenches, and mix it with salt and lime, before flushing it all out to sea with water. "My God," whispers a British merchant watching from a boat offshore, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. He's actually destroying it all. Not selling it, not storing it, not trying to profit from it. He's destroying it, all of it, destroying £250 million worth of merchandise. The process takes 23 days. More than 500 workers labor from dawn to dusk, day after day, destroying the largest stash of illegal drugs ever seized in all of recorded history. By the time it's finished, the largest collection of opium that had ever been gathered in one place has been completely eliminated. Destroyed, gone forever. Lin doesn't stop there. He writes to the emperor, reporting his success. But he also warns that the foreigners, humiliated and angry about the destruction of their property, might seek revenge. He begins strengthening coastal defenses, preparing military fortifications, getting ready for what he fears might come next. His fears are well-founded. When news reaches London that British property has been confiscated without compensation, destroyed in fact, there is outrage. Not at the drug dealers, not at the merchants for smuggling illegal drugs into a country, but at the Chinese government for interfering with what they call legitimate trade. Lord Palmerston, the British Foreign Secretary, is particularly incensed. He writes official statements declaring that the Chinese must be taught that they cannot injure British subjects with impunity. The tone is one of righteous indignation. Britain, he suggests, must respond militarily to this offense. Back in Canton, the foreign merchants are seething with anger and humiliation. They've been confined to their factories like prisoners. They've been forced to surrender valuable property. Their profitable trade has been disrupted. For them, this is intolerable. This cannot stand, Jardine, back in London now, tells his business associates. The Chinese must be taught a lesson, and that lesson can only be taught with British warships. We need military action. Jardine and other merchants begin a sophisticated lobbying campaign with the British government. They frame the issue not as a defense of the drug trade, that would be too obviously corrupt, but as a matter of national honor and free trade principles. They present themselves not as drug dealers, but as businessmen defending British rights and British commerce against an aggressive foreign power. Meanwhile, Lin Zexu believes he's won. The opium has been destroyed. The message has been sent. Surely now the foreigners will obey Chinese law. Surely now they will understand that China will not tolerate this poison. How wrong he is. The destruction of the opium at Human is not the end of the crisis. It's merely the spark that will ignite a much larger conflagration. It's the moment that tips everything over the edge into conflict. You're in a tea house near the waterfront when you overhear Chinese merchants discussing the situation. Commissioner Lin is a great man, one says with respect and admiration. He did what no one else dared to do. He actually stood up to them. He said no. But at what cost? Asks another, his expression troubled. The foreign barbarians are angry. They're talking about warships coming, about military response. What happens if they actually attack? Let them come, says the first merchant with confidence that seems almost naive. What can their tiny kingdom do against the might of the Celestial Empire? We've stood for thousands of years. We're the center of civilization. We're the greatest power on Earth. This was the fatal miscalculation. The Chinese still believed they were the center of the world, the greatest power on Earth, unmatched militarily. They had no idea how far they'd actually fallen behind. They didn't understand how much the world had changed while they remained isolated behind their walls of tradition and cultural certainty. The richest man in Canton, Hauqua, finds himself in an impossible position. He's caught between the Emperor's hammer and the British anvil. He's expected to control the foreigners, but he has no real power to do so. And now he's being held personally responsible for the crisis by imperial officials. You witness a conversation between Hauqua and Commissioner Lin. Even the richest man in Canton bows deeply before the Emperor's representative. The power dynamic has shifted. The foreigners speak of war, Hauqua says quietly, his usual confidence replaced by worry. Their warships have steam engines and iron hulls. Our wooden junks cannot possibly match them. They're technologically superior. You've grown too fond of these barbarians, Lin replies sharply, dismissing Hauqua's concerns with a gesture. The Emperor's will is clear. No more opium. If they bring war, we will crush them as we have crushed barbarian invasions for thousands of years. We are the Celestial Empire. We are eternal. Hauqua doesn't argue further, but his expression speaks volumes. He knows something Lin doesn't fully grasp. The balance of power has shifted. China is no longer the technological and military superpower it once was. The world has changed. The Industrial Revolution has given the West capabilities that traditional Chinese military power cannot match. As summer turns to fall in 1839, tensions continue to rise. Small skirmishes break out between British and Chinese ships. Each side blames the other for provocation. Each incident increases the likelihood of larger conflict. You're on the waterfront when a Chinese official reads an imperial edict. His voice is formal and solemn. All trade with Britain is suspended. The British factories are to be closed. Foreigners are ordered to leave Canton immediately or face arrest. "This is it," says a merchant standing next to you, his voice heavy with certainty. "War is coming. It's inevitable now. Nothing can stop it." And he's right. Back in London, Lord Palmerston has convinced Parliament to send an expeditionary force to China. Officially, the justification is to protect British lives and property. Unofficially, it's to force China to compensate the opium merchants for their losses and to accept British trade on British terms, including the legalized opium trade. As 1839 draws to a close, you notice a change in Canton. The Chinese are preparing for war. Coastal defenses are being strengthened. Troops are drilling regularly. New cannons are being installed along the waterfront. But there's something else too, a sense of uncertainty. Deep down, many Chinese officials suspect they're not ready for what's coming. They fear what might happen. You're sitting in a small restaurant when you overhear two Chinese naval officers talking quietly, thinking no one is listening. "I've seen their ships," one says, his voice low and troubled. "Iron-sided steamers with guns that can fire explosive shells over distances our cannons can't reach. Our wooden junks won't stand a chance against them." "Not a chance. Don't say such things," the other warns urgently. "It's defeatist talk. Dangerous talk. Commissioner Lin would have you reported for speaking this way." "I'm not being defeatist," the first officer replies, leaning closer. "I'm being realistic. We're not ready for this fight. We don't have the weapons, we don't have the ships, we don't have the training. We're going to lose." This was the tragedy unfolding. Lin Zexu, despite all his moral clarity and determination, despite his incorruptible character and his commitment to his mission, didn't fully understand what he was up against. He believed China's size and historical greatness would prevail against what he saw as a small island nation of barbarians. He had faith in tradition and in the mandate of heaven. "The British rely on China for tea," Lin had written to the emperor confidently. "Without our tea, they will develop eye infections, and their economy will collapse. They need us far more than we need them." It was a fundamental misunderstanding of the global situation. Britain was no longer a minor kingdom seeking trade privileges. It was becoming the world's dominant industrial and naval power. The balance had shifted in ways that traditional thinking couldn't fully grasp. As the year ends, you witness one last meeting between Hao Kuo and his American trading partners. The mood is somber, and resignation hangs over the gathering like fog. "War is coming," Hao Kuo tells them quietly. "The British have already decided. The decision has been made in London. But Commissioner Lin doesn't see it. He doesn't understand what's about to happen." "What will you do?" asks one of the Americans. "What can I do?" Hao Kuo sighs deeply. "I am caught between the Emperor's hammer and the British anvil. I've moved as much of my wealth overseas as possible. Now I can only wait and hope that some of my businesses survive what's coming. Hope and pray that I survive personally." The Americans exchange glances. They've already decided to remain neutral in the coming conflict. American ships will continue to trade with China, even as British warships bombard Chinese ports. They'll profit from both sides. "This didn't have to happen," one of the Americans says quietly, almost to himself. "If we hadn't brought the opium, if we hadn't done this..." Another begins. "Someone else would have," replies the first American. "If not you, someone else." The desire for profit is the same in all men, East or West. It's human nature. As 1839 gives way to 1840, the die is cast. British warships are already en route to China, sailing across the Indian Ocean and through the straits toward Canton. The first Opium War is about to begin. The first shots that will shake the world and change China forever are about to be fired. And Commissioner Lin, his determination unshaken despite the gathering storm, continues to arrest opium dealers, strengthen defenses, and prepare for a confrontation he believes China can win. "We have right on our side," he tells his officers. "The Celestial Empire has stood for thousands of years. We will not bow to barbarian demands to poison our people." His moral clarity is admirable. His commitment is genuine. But in the coming war, moral clarity will prove to be no match for explosive shells and steam-powered warships. The greatest drug bust in history, the destruction of 20,000 chests of opium at Human, was supposed to end the opium crisis. Instead, it triggered a chain of events that will accelerate China's decline and change the balance of power in Asia for the next century. The war that would transform China forever was about to begin. Imagine, if you will, a quiet morning in June 1840. A small fishing village called Dinghai, located on Johan Island, wakes to an otherworldly sight that no one has ever witnessed before. 24 British ships have appeared on the horizon overnight, like massive sea creatures rising from the depths. 16 warships bristling with cannons and weapons. 4 armed steamers belching thick, black smoke from their funnels. 4 supply vessels carrying provisions and ammunition. The Chinese coastal defenders stare in disbelief at what they're seeing. They've never seen ships that can move through the water without sails. Never witnessed vessels constructed entirely of iron instead of wood. Never imagined cannons that could fire explosive shells over distances that their own guns cannot possibly hope to reach. The very concept of steam-powered warfare is foreign to them. "What are those devil ships?" whispers a young Chinese soldier gripping his spear tightly, his knuckles white with tension. His voice trembles with fear and confusion. His commander has no answer. How could he? Nothing in thousands of years of Chinese military history has prepared him for what's coming. Nothing in their experience or their training or their historical knowledge has equipped them to face what's about to happen. You're witnessing the beginning of the First Opium War. You watch from a fishing boat offshore as the British fleet takes position, their ships moving with precision and purpose. What's about to unfold isn't just a battle in the traditional sense. It's the violent collision of two worlds, one clinging to ancient traditions and ways of warfare that have remained essentially unchanged for millennia. The other transformed by the Industrial Revolution, with weapons and tactics that represent an entirely new era of human conflict. The outcome was written before the first shot was even fired, before a single cannon roared, before the first soldier was killed. The British possessed technological superiority that would prove absolutely decisive. The British commander, Captain Charles Elliot, sends a message to shore. His terms are clear: surrender or face bombardment. The Chinese commander refuses. He has his orders from Commissioner Lin and the Emperor himself. No compromise, no negotiation, no surrender. Failure is not an option. At noon, the British open fire. The sound is unlike anything the Chinese defenders have ever heard. Not just the familiar boom of cannon fire, but the shriek of explosive shells, a weapon they've never encountered before. These aren't solid iron balls like traditional cannonballs. These are hollow iron projectiles filled with gunpowder that explode on impact, sending lethal fragments in all directions, shrapnel that tears through flesh and wood alike. "They can't possibly hit us from that distance," says a Chinese officer standing at the top of the coastal fort, his voice confident despite the unfamiliar sounds around him. "Those ships are too far away. Our cannons couldn't reach them from here." Those are his last words. A British shell strikes the fort's wall directly beneath where he's standing. The explosion tears through stone and flesh with equal ease, indiscriminate in its violence. When the smoke clears, the officer and a dozen defenders are simply gone. Vanished, killed in an instant by a weapon they didn't even know existed. The bombardment continues for hours. It's relentless and devastating. By evening, the Chinese coastal defenses are in ruins. Smoke hangs over the destroyed fort. Bodies lie scattered. The British land marines and soldiers who quickly overwhelm what little resistance remains. The defenders, armed with spears and traditional weapons, stand no chance against trained soldiers with modern rifles and artillery support. Ding Hai falls with barely a fight. "This is impossible," mutters a captured Chinese officer, his face streaked with ash and blood. How could barbarians defeat the forces of the Celestial Empire so easily? How is this possible? We are the greatest power. We have the mandate of heaven. He's about to learn that his empire isn't as celestial as he believed. That heaven's mandate might have shifted. That the world has changed in ways his ancient civilization didn't notice while it was isolated behind its walls. The British moved methodically up the coast, capturing one port after another with minimal casualties. Their strategy is simple but devastatingly effective. Use naval power to bombard coastal defenses from a safe distance where Chinese cannons cannot reach. Then land troops to secure the area once resistance has been broken. It's a process they repeat again and again, a formula that never fails because the Chinese have no defense against it. In the grand halls of Beijing, the emperor receives the news with disbelief bordering on denial. How can a small island of barbarians challenge the might of China? He demands of his advisors, his voice rising in anger and confusion. We outnumber them 100 to 1, perhaps 200 to 1. How is this possible? They're just merchants and sailors. We're the Celestial Empire. A brave official steps forward, taking a risk by speaking truth to power. "Your Majesty," he says carefully, "their weapons are different from anything we have. Our brave soldiers fight with swords and spears, weapons that have served us well for generations. The barbarians have machines that breathe fire and iron ships that move without wind. The technology gap is significant." The emperor's face darkens with anger. "You speak of them as if they are gods, not men. Are you suggesting that the Celestial Empire cannot defeat these merchants? That China cannot prevail against a small island nation? Are you a traitor?" No one dares answer directly. To suggest that China might lose would be seen as treason, as betraying the empire. But the truth is becoming impossible to ignore for anyone with eyes to see what's actually happening. Back on the coast, you've managed to position yourself aboard a Chinese war junk as a translator. From this vantage point, you witness the Battle of Chuanpi, if battle is even the right word for such a one-sided affair. The Chinese naval forces consist of war junks, large wooden sailing vessels with cannons that can fire iron balls approximately half a mile. They're arrayed in a defensive formation near the shore, positioned to repel what they expect to be a traditional naval attack. Then you see it approaching through the morning mist, the HMS Nemesis, the British secret weapon, a ship that will become legendary in Chinese history, an iron-hull steam-powered warship specifically built for this war. It draws only 6 feet of water, allowing it to navigate the shallow coastal waters where traditional warships cannot go. It's armed with 2 32-pounder guns that can fire explosive shells, 2 6-pounder guns, and a battery of Congreve rockets. But what truly terrifies the Chinese sailors is what this ship represents: the future of warfare. "It's a fire devil ship," whispers the Chinese captain, his voice filled with dread. "How can we possibly fight such a thing? How do you fight a ship that moves against the wind? How do you fight a machine?" The battle begins. The Chinese junks fire their cannons, but most shots fall short or bounce harmlessly off the Nemesis's iron hull. In return, the British ship launches rockets that scream across the water before exploding among the tightly packed formation of wooden Chinese vessels. Then it fires its main cannons, sending explosive shells into the packed formation of Chinese ships. The carnage is appalling. One Chinese ship explodes when a shell hits its powder magazine. The explosion is catastrophic, consuming the entire vessel in an instant. Another catches fire and burns to the waterline, its crew jumping overboard in panic, only to drown in their heavy armor. A third is torn apart by rockets, splinters of wood slicing through the sailors like knives. Within an hour, the battle is over. The Chinese fleet is destroyed or scattered. The nemesis is barely scratched. A few minor impacts, nothing significant. The British ship has proven that traditional wooden naval forces stand no chance against iron-hulled, steam-powered vessels. "We never stood a chance," the Chinese captain tells you as he orders his surviving crew to abandon ship. His voice is hollow, defeated. "Our generals and admirals trained to fight the wars of our ancestors. They learned strategy and tactics from books written 1,000 years ago. The British are fighting with weapons our children's children couldn't imagine. We're fighting the past against the future, and the future always wins." This scene repeats itself along the coast as the British move northward with inexorable momentum, destroying Chinese forces at Canton, Amoy, Ningpo, and beyond. It's not just a military defeat, it's a psychological one. The Chinese worldview that they are the center of civilization surrounded by barbarian states is being shattered by iron and fire. Everything they believed about their place in the world is being proven false. By January 1841, the British have blockaded the Pearl River and effectively cut off Canton from the sea. Commissioner Lin, who had been so determined to end the opium trade, finds himself blamed for provoking a war that China cannot win. The emperor, needing a scapegoat, dismisses him from his post and sends him into exile. The man who tried to save his country becomes the person blamed for its humiliation. Lin was too harsh with the barbarians, you overhear an imperial official telling another in Canton, his voice carefully neutral. Now we pay the price for his pride and his aggression. But he was only following the emperor's orders, the other replies quietly. The emperor commanded him to stop the trade. Shh, the first official warns urgently. Such talk is dangerous. The emperor is divine and makes no mistakes. It was Lin's failure in execution, not the emperor's policy, that brought this disaster upon us. This kind of delusional thinking was common among the imperial court. Unable to accept that China had fallen behind the West technologically, unable to face the reality of what was happening, they sought explanations that preserved their worldview. They blamed individuals rather than acknowledging systemic failures. They blamed Lin rather than recognizing that the entire Chinese military system was obsolete. Meanwhile, the war continues its relentless course. In February 1841, the British launch a major attack on the Bogue forts, the defenses guarding the approach to Canton. These are positioned as China's strongest coastal defenses, with hundreds of cannons and thousands of troops. If any attack could be repelled, surely it would be here. You watch the battle from a hillside overlooking the forts. The Chinese have positioned their guns well, with overlapping fields of fire covering the narrow channel. It looks like a strong defensive position. But the British, as always, have a different approach in mind. Instead of a frontal assault on the forts, they land troops on the hills behind the forts using a basic flanking maneuver, a tactic so simple and so obvious that it seems the Chinese commanders never anticipated it. "They're behind us," a Chinese officer shouts in panic as the situation becomes clear. "How did they get behind us? What's happening?" By noon, the British flag flies over the forts. Over 400 Chinese soldiers lie dead. British casualties are 38. The pattern becomes painfully clear. It's not just superior British technology that's winning this war. It's superior tactics, superior training, and a fundamental understanding of modern warfare that the Chinese military simply doesn't possess. In May 1841, the British capture the city of Canton itself. Rather than occupy it permanently, they extract a ransom of $6 million silver from the local authorities to spare the city from destruction. The payment is made. The British withdraw to their ships. But the message has been sent clearly. China's greatest trading port can be taken or spared at the whim of foreign powers. Chinese sovereignty means nothing in the face of superior force. You're in a tea house in Canton when news arrives that the British fleet has sailed north, carrying the war into new territory, expanding their operations beyond the initial coastal areas. The locals are both relieved that the immediate danger has passed and humiliated by what's happened. "At least they're gone," says one merchant. trying to find something positive in the situation. We can rebuild. We can return to normal. Yes, after taking enough silver to bankrupt the province, another replies bitterly. And they'll be back. They know we're defenseless now. The imperial government has been humiliated. The military has been defeated. What's to stop them from returning whenever they want more silver, more concessions, more territory? Where is our mighty army? A merchant spits on the floor in frustration. Where are the imperial bannermen who were supposed to protect us from barbarians? Gone, defeated, humiliated by merchants and sailors. An old man in the corner speaks up. I fought the Mongols as a young man, he says quietly. We had the same weapons they did. Bows, swords, spears. Man against man. But these British, they don't fight like men. They fight like demons with fire and thunder. How can flesh and blood stand against such things? This was the reality that China was facing. Its military, once the most powerful in Asia, had stagnated while the West had revolutionized warfare. The gap wasn't one that could be closed quickly or easily. The distance between traditional Chinese warfare and industrial-era British warfare was vast and seemingly unbridgeable. The British fleet continues north with methodical precision, attacking and capturing key coastal cities. Ningpo falls in October 1841. Hangzhou follows. By June 1842, British ships have reached the Yangtze River, China's great waterway and the heartland of the empire. This was unprecedented. No foreign power had penetrated so deeply into China in centuries. The psychological impact on the Chinese was devastating. If the British could sail up the Yangtze with impunity, nowhere in China was truly safe. In August 1842, British warships appear before the great city of Nanjing, just 200 miles from the imperial capital of Beijing. The message is unmistakable. Surrender, or the British will march on Beijing itself. The emperor, finally recognizing the severity of the situation, sends representatives to negotiate peace. The British, their point made, agree to talks. What follows is the Treaty of Nanjing. You're present as Chinese and British officials gather aboard the HMS Cornwallis to sign the treaty. The contrast between the two delegations is striking. The British are confident, almost casual, knowing they hold all the cards and can demand whatever terms they wish. The Chinese officials are solemn, their faces masks that hide their internal anguish and humiliation. The terms are read aloud in a formal ceremony. China will pay an indemnity of 21 million silver dollars, an astronomical sum that will cripple the imperial treasury. Hong Kong Island will be ceded to Britain in perpetuity, the first Chinese territory to be taken by a foreign power. 5 ports, Canton, Amoy, Fuzhou, Ningpo, and Shanghai, will be open to British residents and trade. British citizens in China will no longer be subject to Chinese law, but will instead be governed by British law, a concept known as extraterritoriality that effectively places them above local authority. And though not explicitly stated in the treaty's text, the opium trade will continue unhindered. As the Chinese officials apply their official seals to the document, one turns away, unable to hide the tears streaming down his face. His entire world has been turned upside down. 2,000 years of history, he whispers to a colleague, and we are the ones who must sign away the emperor's sovereignty. We are the ones who must admit defeat to barbarians. The British, for their part, see the treaty as quite reasonable. They could have demanded much more, perhaps even the overthrow of the Qing dynasty itself. Instead, they've settled for terms that secure their commercial interests while leaving the Chinese government intact to maintain order and collect taxes. A most satisfactory conclusion, Sir Henry Pottinger, the British plenipotentiary, declares after the signing. Britain and China can now look forward to an era of peaceful and mutually beneficial trade. The Chinese don't share his optimistic view. For them, the Treaty of Nanjing isn't the end of a conflict but the beginning of what they will come to call the century of humiliation. A period when China, once the center of the world, is reduced to a semi-colonial state, carved up by foreign powers, its sovereignty stripped away piece by piece. As news of the treaty spreads throughout China, reactions are mixed. Government officials blame Commissioner Lin for provoking the war. Merchants hope the restoration of trade will bring prosperity. Ordinary people simply wonder what it all means for their daily lives. Many don't fully understand the implications of what's happened. In a small village outside Canton, you listen as a teacher explains the situation to his students. The barbarians came with fire ships and thunder weapons, he says carefully. Our brave soldiers fought valiantly, but were overcome by their superior technology. The emperor, in his wisdom, has decided to make peace. This is the best outcome we could have hoped for given the circumstances. A young boy raises his hand. But teacher, I heard my father say we lost because our weapons are old and our generals are corrupt. Is that true? The teacher hesitates. To speak ill of the imperial system is dangerous. It could mean arrest or worse. But to lie to his students about something so fundamental to their future seems equally wrong. The ways of the Celestial Empire have served us well for thousands of years, he says carefully. But perhaps it is time to learn some of the barbarians' methods, if only to better defend against them in the future, if only to understand them and prepare for what might come next. This sentiment, that China needed to adopt Western technology while maintaining its cultural essence, would become a central debate among Chinese intellectuals in the coming decades. But for now, the immediate reality is one of defeat and humiliation. The First Opium War officially ends on August 29, 1842. British casualties total less than 500, mostly from disease rather than combat. Chinese casualties are never accurately counted, but are estimated in the thousands. More significant than the human cost, though, is the psychological cost. China's image of itself as the center of civilization has been shattered. Its military, once feared throughout Asia, has been exposed as obsolete and ineffective. Its government, claiming the mandate of heaven, has been forced to submit to barbarian demands. The opium trade, the catalyst for the conflict, doesn't end. It doesn't even decrease. It expands. British ships now legally dock at 5 Chinese ports. Western merchants establish permanent residences in these ports, creating their own communities, essentially colonial outposts. The flow of opium into China, rather than being stemmed by the war, increases dramatically. In 1839, before the war, roughly 40,000 chests of opium were being smuggled into China annually. By 1858, that number would exceed 70,000 chests. About 4,500 tons of opium flooding into China each year. The addiction that had begun to weaken Chinese society before the war now accelerates, spreading from coastal cities into the interior, reaching every level of society from imperial officials to peasant farmers. As for Commissioner Lin, the man who tried to stop the opium trade, he spends 3 years in internal exile before being rehabilitated and appointed governor of the remote Yunnan province. He dies in 1850. While traveling to fight rebels in the Taiping Rebellion, an uprising partly inspired by the weakness that the Qing dynasty displayed during the Opium War. Decades later, when China begins to reckon with its modern history, Lin will be rehabilitated again, this time as a national hero, a patriot who stood up to foreign aggression and paid the price for his principles. But in the immediate aftermath of the war, he is simply a scapegoat, blamed for a failure that was not truly his. The real failure was systemic. A once great empire that had turned inward, convinced of its own superiority, while the world around it transformed through industrialization and new ideas. The First Opium War lasts just 2 years in terms of active combat, but its impact on China will echo for more than a century. It marks the beginning of China's painful transition from ancient empire to modern nation, a transition forced upon it by external pressure rather than internal evolution. And it all began with opium, a flowering plant that generated enormous profits for foreign merchants while feeding an addiction that weakened Chinese society from within. The drug that triggered the conflict continues to flow into China, now protected by treaties and gunboats. The disease hasn't been cured. It has been legitimized, legalized, made respectable by international treaty. As you stand on the deck of a ship leaving China in late 1842, watching the coast recede into the distance, you wonder what the future holds for this ancient civilization that's facing an utterly changed world. You can feel it in your bones. Something fundamental has shifted. The certainty is gone. The confidence is gone. You wonder if China will ever recover from what's just happened. What you don't know, what nobody could possibly predict, is that the First Opium War is just the beginning of a much longer story of decline. More humiliations await, more unequal treaties, more territorial concessions, more foreign interference, and in just 14 years, a second Opium War will erupt, driving China even deeper into an abyss of addiction, exploitation, and national decline. But for now, as you sail away into the night, the story continues in the darkness behind you. The ink on the Treaty of Nanjing is barely dry, but already China is a fundamentally different place. It's 1843 now, and you've returned to Canton after a brief absence. The city feels changed in ways that go beyond the physical damage of war. The swagger and confidence of imperial officials have been replaced by something more subdued, almost defeated. The British walk the streets now with a new confidence, almost swaggering, behaving as if they own the place. And in many ways, they do. They act like they own the place, mutters a Chinese merchant, as a group of British traders stroll past without bothering to acknowledge the local population. And I suppose now they do. His resentment is justified. The Treaty of Nanjing might have ended the fighting, but it's done something far more damaging to the Chinese psyche than any cannonball could ever do. It's pierced the heart of how China sees itself. For centuries, millennia really, China viewed itself as the center of civilization, the Middle Kingdom surrounded by barbarian states far beneath its level of development. The emperor was the son of heaven, the ruler of all under heaven. Foreign kings were seen not as equals, but as tributary vassals who should rightfully bow before Chinese superiority. They should acknowledge the empire's eternal greatness. And now, those barbarians dictate terms from the decks of iron ships. Now, the Son of Heaven must surrender territory, pay crippling indemnities, and accept humiliating restrictions on his own sovereignty. The world has been inverted. The true cost of the treaty isn't measured in silver, explains a scholar you meet in a tea house, his expression a mixture of sorrow and resignation. It's measured in something far more precious, our sense of place in the world. For thousands of years, we knew who we were. We were the center. We were superior. We were eternal. That certainty is gone now. While the British celebrate their victory with champagne in newly established clubs in Canton, the Chinese government faces the grim task of implementing the treaty's demands. The first priority is paying the massive indemnity of 21 million silver dollars. To understand what this means, consider that the entire annual revenue of the Qing government is only about 40 million taels of silver. This indemnity represents more than a year's worth of the imperial government's total income. It's catastrophic. You're at the waterfront when carts loaded with silver ingots arrive under heavy guard. Chinese officials oversee the transfer to British ships, their faces arranged in passive masks that hide their internal humiliation. Where did all this silver come from? You ask a local merchant watching the procession. Everywhere, he says grimly. Provincial treasuries stripped bare, wealthy families encouraged, really pressured, to make patriotic donations to the state. New taxes on already struggling regions. The government is squeezing the people for every last bit of silver. He points to a group of peasants watching from a distance, their expressions empty. They'll feel it worst. When officials can't collect enough regular taxes to meet their quotas after paying the indemnity, they impose new ones. The yamen runners, the tax collectors, will squeeze blood from stones to get what they need. That's what happens to ordinary people when nations lose wars and have to pay indemnities. This was the bitter reality. The burden of paying for China's defeat would fall most heavily on those least responsible for the war and least able to bear it financially. Ordinary farmers and workers already living on the edge of subsistence would suffer the most. The wealthy found ways to protect themselves. The poor had no options. Meanwhile, the British take possession of Hong Kong Island, a sparsely populated rocky outcrop that most Chinese officials had considered nearly worthless. A barren rock, a fishing village, nothing of value. A barren island with hardly a house upon it, scoffed the emperor's representatives during negotiations. Why would anyone want it? But the British saw what the Chinese didn't. A perfect deep-water harbor strategically located at the mouth of the Pearl River, an ideal jumping-off point for further expansion into China. Within years, Hong Kong would begin its transformation from a simple fishing village to one of the world's great commercial centers, all under the British flag, all beyond Chinese control. "Mark my words," says a British merchant watching the Union Jack being raised over Hong Kong for the first time, his eyes gleaming with vision. "In 50 years, this rock will be the jewel of the Orient, the most valuable possession in Asia. This will be the key to everything. The treaty's impacts extend far beyond Hong Kong and far beyond the immediate economic costs. 5 Chinese ports, Canton, Amoy, Fuzhou, Ningpo, and Shanghai, are designated as treaty ports where foreigners can live and trade with minimal restrictions. Within these enclaves, the British and soon other Western powers establish their own little colonies, complete with European architecture, European laws, and European customs. They're not really part of China anymore. They're pieces of Europe embedded in Chinese territory. You visit Shanghai in 1845, just a few years after it becomes a treaty port. The transformation is already stunning and somewhat surreal. Where once stood Chinese shops and traditional homes, Western trading houses now dominate the waterfront. Union Jacks and other foreign flags fly above imposing new buildings, constructed in distinctly European styles. European buildings standing in the middle of China. It's like they cut out a piece of London and dropped it here, remarks a Chinese companion showing you around, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and resentment. It's not China. It's a European city that happens to be located in China. Most jarring of all is the invisible line dividing the European settlements from the Chinese city. Cross into the foreign concessions, and suddenly the streets are wider, cleaner, paved with better materials, patrolled by foreign police. The buildings are newer, the standards of sanitation higher, the general appearance more orderly. Cross back into the Chinese sections and you return to narrow alleys, traditional architecture, the familiar chaos of Chinese urban life, and Chinese jurisdiction. But even that jurisdiction is now limited by one of the treaty's most humiliating provisions: extraterritoriality. Western citizens in China are not subject to Chinese law. If they commit crimes, even crimes against Chinese victims, they can only be tried by their own consular courts under their own laws. A British sailor killed a Chinese porter in a drunken incident. Your companion tells you about it as you walk past a British police station. He ran the man down with a cart, the companion explains. Drunk, no excuse. If a Chinese had done that to another Chinese, he'd be executed. But the sailor? 3 months in jail, then sent back to Britain, free. No real punishment. They call that justice here. This 2-tier legal system creates a sense of untouchability among foreigners and deep, festering resentment among the Chinese. Every incident of a foreigner committing a crime and receiving minimal punishment, every case where Chinese victims receive no justice, further stokes the anger and humiliation that ordinary Chinese feel. But perhaps the most devastating consequence of the treaty isn't written explicitly in any of its articles. It's what's not written, what's absent. Any prohibition on the opium trade. Despite fighting a war ostensibly to stop British merchants from selling opium, China now finds itself unable to prevent the very trade that started the conflict. In fact, the opium trade doesn't just continue after the war, it explodes in growth. By 1850, annual imports have nearly doubled from pre-war levels to about 50,000 chests. By 1858, they'll reach 70,000 chests. What was once smuggled under cover of darkness now arrives openly at the treaty ports, protected by British gunboats and the implicit threat of renewed conflict if Chinese officials interfere. "We fought a war against opium," says a dejected Chinese customs official, watching crates of the drug being unloaded in broad daylight without any attempt at concealment. "We lost thousands of men, we paid millions in silver. Our empire was humiliated, and for what? So they could sell even more of their poison without hiding it? So they could operate openly with legal protection? The human cost is visible everywhere. Opium dens multiply across China. They're no longer confined to coastal cities but spreading inland along trade routes, penetrating deeper into the interior. Addiction rates soar to unprecedented levels. Productivity plummets in regions where opium use becomes endemic. Families are devastated as breadwinners spend their entire income on the drug rather than food or necessities. You visit an opium den in Shanghai, not one of the luxurious establishments catering to wealthy merchants or officials, but a squalid room packed with laborers and coolies seeking temporary escape from grueling lives. The air is thick with sweet acrid smoke. Men lie on crude wooden platforms, their bodies wasted, their eyes vacant and distant. Some have been here for days, neglecting work, family, everything but their need for the pipe. Most of these men were dock workers, explains the den's operator, a gaunt man with yellow-stained fingers. Good jobs, good pay, steady work. Now they work just enough to afford their daily smoke. Then they come here and disappear into the dreams. He points to a particularly emaciated figure in the corner. That one sold his daughter last week. 8 years old. Sold her to a brothel for enough silver to smoke for a month. That's what happens when addiction takes over completely. People lose their humanity. They lose everything. The brutal economics of addiction play out across China on an almost unimaginable scale. Families sell land that has been in their lineage for generations, property their ancestors owned for centuries. Women are forced into prostitution because it's the only way to survive. Men abandon wives and children. The social fabric that has held Chinese society together for millennia begins to unravel, thread by thread, and as China struggles with these internal wounds, the external pressure continues to mount. The British, having tasted success, want more. The Treaty of Nanjing becomes not an endpoint, but a beginning. The first step in what they see as the inevitable process of opening China fully to Western economic penetration. Other Western powers, unwilling to let Britain monopolize the China trade, demand similar concessions. The United States secures the Treaty of Wangyia in 1844, granting Americans the same privileges as the British. France follows with the Treaty of Whampoa. Each new treaty further erodes Chinese sovereignty piece by piece. It's like watching vultures pick at a wounded animal, observes an American missionary, witnessing the diplomatic scramble for concessions. The poor beast isn't dead yet, but everyone's already fighting over the choicest parts. Everyone wants their share. Inside the Forbidden City in Beijing, the emperor and his advisors grapple with their new reality. Some advocate for reform, arguing that China must learn from the West to defend against it. Others insist on maintaining traditional ways, seeing Western technology as a threat to Confucian social order and ancient wisdom. This internal debate is overshadowed by a more immediate crisis. The treasury is nearly empty after paying the British indemnity. Provincial governors send increasingly desperate reports of their inability to collect sufficient taxes from populations impoverished by opium addiction and economic disruption. The people have nothing left to give, reads one memorial to the throne from a desperate provincial official. They've sold their possessions. They've sold their land. They've sold their children. When all else is gone, they turn to banditry or rebellion. The social order is breaking down. Signs of unrest begin to appear across the empire. Secret societies long suppressed by imperial authorities gain new followers among those discontented with the government's weakness. Religious movements with apocalyptic visions find fertile ground among peasants seeking any explanation for their suffering, any promise of change. In the south, a failed scholar named Hong Jiuquan begins having visions after repeatedly failing the imperial examinations. He becomes convinced he is Jesus Christ's younger brother, sent to rid China of both the Manchu demons who rule as the Qing dynasty and the foreign devils who push their opium and religion. His movement, which will become known as the Taiping Rebellion, begins gathering followers in Guangxi province in the late 1840s. By 1850, it explodes into what will become the deadliest civil war in human history, claiming an estimated 20 to 30 million lives over 14 years. 20 to 30 million people. More deaths than World War I. More deaths than the American Civil War. A catastrophe born partly from the weakness that the Opium Wars exposed. Against this backdrop of internal chaos, the Western powers continue pressing for more concessions. British merchants and officials, unsatisfied with the limited access granted by the Treaty of Nanjing, demand more treaty ports, deeper access to China's interior, and, most important to them, legalization of the opium trade. When the Qing government resists these demands, tensions rise again. The powder keg is full. All it needs is a spark. That spark comes in October 1856, when Chinese officials in Canton board a British-registered ship called the Arrow and arrest several Chinese crew members suspected of piracy. The British consul demands their release, claiming the ship is under British protection. The Chinese refuse, noting that the ship is Chinese-owned and was flying no flag at the time of the boarding. The Arrow incident becomes the pretext for what will be known as the Second Opium War, though it's really about forcing China to accept even more humiliating terms. "This is absurd," says a Chinese official when discussing the situation. "When we tried to stop their illegal drug trade, they fought a war against us. They won, forced us to pay millions, took our territory. And now, less than 15 years later, they're ready to attack again because we arrested pirates on our own soil. How much more can they take from us?" The answer, as China is about to discover, is much more. By late 1856, British warships are bombarding Chinese coastal defenses. This time, they're joined by the French, who use the execution of a French missionary as their cause. Against the combined might of these industrial powers, China's military stands little chance. The Second Opium War proceeds much like the first. Western forces easily overcome Chinese resistance using superior technology, tactics, and training. But this conflict will prove even more humiliating, culminating in an act of cultural vandalism that scars the Chinese psyche to this day. In October 1860, British and French forces reach the outskirts of Beijing itself, something unimaginable just decades earlier. When the Chinese attempt to negotiate, British envoys are captured and tortured. Several die in captivity. In retaliation, the British High Commissioner, Lord Elgin, orders the destruction of the old summer palace, the Yuanming Yuan. The Yuanming Yuan isn't just any palace. It's the crown jewel of Chinese architecture and art, a vast complex of exquisite buildings, gardens, and priceless artifacts accumulated over centuries. For China, it represents what Versailles represents for France, what the Vatican represents for Italy. A cultural treasure of incalculable value. Over 3 days, British and French troops systematically loot the palace, taking anything portable of value. Then they burn everything that remains. 200 years of Chinese cultural heritage go up in flames, irreplaceable treasures destroyed, art lost forever, history erased. I had never witnessed such scenes of destruction, writes a French officer present at the looting, his conscience troubled by what he participated in. One could walk only on precious objects. Everywhere you looked, there was another priceless thing. And they were destroying it all. When news of the destruction reaches the Chinese public, the psychological impact is devastating. It's not just a military defeat or a political humiliation, it's a direct attack on Chinese civilization itself. It's a statement that even China's greatest cultural achievements are not worthy of respect or preservation. Those Western soldiers care nothing for Chinese heritage. The treaties that end the Second Opium War impose even harsher terms than the Treaty of Nanjing. 10 more ports are open to foreign trade. Foreigners gain the right to travel in the interior of China. Christian missionaries receive protection for their activities. The opium trade is explicitly legalized, no longer tolerated or ignored but legally permitted and protected by international treaty. The indemnity dwarfs that of the First War, further draining Chinese resources and impoverishing the people. And perhaps most symbolically painful, foreign diplomats gain the right to reside in Beijing itself, the sacred capital that had been largely closed to barbarians for centuries. The Son of Heaven must now receive representatives of foreign powers as equals in his own capital, a final repudiation of the tributary system that had placed China at the center of its world. By 1860, China has been transformed from the self-proclaimed center of civilization to a semi-colonial state carved into spheres of influence by foreign powers. Its economy is distorted by opium. Its government is weakened both externally by unequal treaties and internally by rebellions. The empire that once seemed eternal is crumbling. And all of this, the wars, the treaties, the cultural destruction, the social disintegration, can be traced back to those first chests of opium that began flowing into Canton in the late 1700s. A plant, a flower, a drug. The catalyst for the fall of the world's oldest continuous civilization. You stand at the Shanghai waterfront in 1860, watching yet another shipment of opium being unloaded from a British vessel. The drug that was once smuggled in under cover of darkness now arrives openly, protected by international treaties and Western gunboats. A Chinese scholar stands beside you. His expression is a mixture of sorrow and resignation as he watches his country's poison being delivered. When future generations write the history of the fall of the Qing dynasty, he says quietly, let them remember it began not with a revolution or a great battle, but with smoke, with dreams, with weakness that spread like a disease through our veins until we could no longer stand upright in the world. He turns to look at you, his eyes clear and piercing despite the destruction around him. Remember what you have witnessed here, he tells you. Tell others, for this is how empires truly fall, not all at once with a great crash and dramatic fanfare, but slowly, day by day, choice by choice, weakness by weakness, until one day you look up and realize that what once seemed eternal has vanished like morning mist. As night falls over Shanghai, lamps are lit in countless opium dens across the city. Thousands of smokers seek their nightly escape from a reality that grows more unbearable with each passing year. The sweet, acrid smell of opium hangs in the air like an invisible fog, binding the city in shared dreams and shared destruction. And somewhere in the Forbidden City, an emperor who claims the mandate of heaven sits surrounded by luxury, increasingly irrelevant to the forces shaping his nation's fate. His power is hollow, his authority is questioned. His civilization is sliding further into what will be known as its century of humiliation. The Opium Wars are over. The Greater War, China's struggle to reclaim its sovereignty, rebuild its strength, and redefine its place in a world transformed by industrialization, has only just begun. And the shadow of the poppy will hang over this struggle for decades to come. The year is 1875. 15 years have passed since the Second Opium War ended. You're traveling through Yunnan province in southwestern China, far from the treaty ports and foreign concessions of the coast. But even here in this remote mountainous region, you can't escape the legacy of opium. The hillsides, once covered with rice paddies and vegetable plots, are now blanketed with a different crop. Fields of poppies stretch as far as the eye can see, their delicate pink and white flowers belying the devastation they represent. It's ironic. Beautiful, tragic irony. Beautiful, aren't they? Says your local guide, gesturing toward the flowers with a complicated expression. Terrible, but beautiful. Dangerous, but lovely to look at. You stop to talk with a farmer tending his poppy field. His hands are stained with the sticky brown residue from scoring the seed pods to collect the sap. The work is delicate and time-consuming. I grew rice for 20 years, he tells you, wiping sweat from his brow. Could barely feed my family. The yields were poor. The prices were low. I was always struggling, always on the edge of poverty. Now I grow poppies, and for the first time I have silver to spare. My children eat regularly. I can pay my taxes without borrowing. But don't you worry about contributing to addiction? You ask, trying to understand how he rationalizes his choices. Don't you think about the people who smoke your poppies? The families destroyed by addiction? The farmer looks at you with tired eyes that have seen too much struggle. The foreign devils brought the poison to China. They got rich from it. The imperial officials took their cut. The merchants profited. Why shouldn't Chinese farmers have a share? Besides, he adds quietly, his voice tinged with resignation, if I don't grow it, someone else will. The demand is there. The market exists. The only question is who profits from it. Why not me? Why should I remain poor if there's money to be made? This is the cruel irony of what's happened in the decades since the Opium Wars. Having failed to keep foreign opium out of China, having been defeated militarily and forced to accept the trade by treaty, China has begun producing its own opium domestically. By the 1870s, domestic production has overtaken imports. By the end of the century, China will produce 85% of the opium consumed within its borders. The foreigners succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, explains a provincial official over dinner that evening, his voice bitter. They didn't just addict our people to opium, they addicted our entire economy to it. He's not exaggerating. In many provinces, opium has become the cash crop that pays the taxes that keep local governments functioning. Attempts to suppress opium cultivation meet fierce resistance, not just from farmers trying to survive, but from officials who depend on opium revenue for their budgets. Last year, Beijing sent an inspector to reduce opium cultivation in the province, the official continues, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. Within a week, he owned 3 new houses and was seen smoking in the best dens in the provincial capital. The fields of poppies remain untouched. He understood the reality. Fighting opium means fighting the economic foundation of the province. It's impossible. This corruption extends throughout the entire system. The Qing dynasty, once the world's most powerful empire, now struggles to control even its own officials. The central government in Beijing issues edicts that are ignored in the provinces. Reforms are announced but never implemented. Modernization efforts start and stop, hampered by lack of funds and entrenched resistance from officials who benefit from the current system. Meanwhile, the Western powers, having opened China's doors through the opium trade, now walk through them with impunity. They're no longer content with treaty ports. They want railways to transport goods. They want mines to extract resources. They want factories. They want the complete economic colonization of China. You travel to Shanghai in 1880 and find a city transformed. The humble fishing village of a century earlier has become a booming international metropolis dominated by foreign interests. The Bund, Shanghai's waterfront, is lined with imposing European-style banks, trading houses, and consulates. The streets are patrolled by police from multiple countries. Signs in English, French, and German are more prominent than Chinese characters. The city feels foreign, not Chinese. This isn't China anymore. says a local merchant as you walk along the Bund, gesturing at the European architecture and foreign faces. This is a piece of Europe built on Chinese soil for European benefit. He points across the Huangpu River to the old Chinese city, its traditional buildings and narrow streets a stark contrast to the ordered European development. That's where most Chinese live, crowded, poor, still struggling with opium. Meanwhile, the foreigners grow rich on our trade, our labor, our land. They take, and we get nothing but addiction and humiliation. This pattern repeats itself across China. Foreign concessions in treaty ports become islands of Western privilege amid Chinese poverty. Western businesses operate under advantageous treaties that Chinese competitors can't match. Western missionaries spread Christianity, undermining traditional beliefs. Western ideas challenge Confucian orthodoxy. Beneath it all, opium continues its work, weakening the social fabric, draining wealth, reducing productivity. By the 1890s, the carving up of the Chinese melon, as diplomats callously term it, accelerates. Russia seizes influence in Manchuria. Germany takes Shandong. France claims parts of the southwest. Britain expands from Hong Kong into the new territories. Japan, having learned from observing Western methods, begins its own expansion at China's expense. You witness a meeting of foreign diplomats in Beijing in 1895, shortly after China's humiliating defeat in the Sino-Japanese War. A conflict that shocks the world by showing that even Japan, once a tributary state that learned civilization from China, has now surpassed its former teacher in military power. The psychological blow is crushing. The Chinese government is essentially bankrupt, says a British diplomat, spreading a map on the table. The dynasty cannot last much longer in its current form. We must secure our interests before the collapse. We must establish spheres of influence where each nation has preferential rights. His colleagues nod in agreement as they draw lines across the map of China, dividing it into spheres of influence where each Western power will have preferential rights to develop railways, mines, and other enterprises. They're essentially partitioning China without even bothering to negotiate with the Chinese government. What about the Chinese people? Asks a junior diplomat, new to his posting, still idealistic enough to believe in justice and fairness. Don't they have any say in this? Don't they have any right to decide their own fate? The others laugh, a cold, dismissive laugh. My dear boy, says a senior French representative, China ceased to have a say in its own affairs the moment it lost the Opium War. Everything since has merely been confirmation of that fact. They're a fallen empire now. History has passed them by. We're just mopping up the details. This carving up of China represents the culmination of what began with those first chests of opium. A sovereign nation has been reduced to a geographical space where foreign powers compete for advantage. Its government is too weak to resist. Its people are too divided and demoralized to unite in opposition. The empire is in its death throes. But beneath the surface, something is stirring. A new generation of Chinese intellectuals, many educated abroad or in Western-style schools, begins to question not just foreign domination, but the imperial system itself. They see the Qing dynasty not as the victim of Western aggression, but as its enabler through corruption, incompetence, and failure to modernize. In tea houses and universities, in secret societies and overseas communities, they debate China's future, reform or revolution, constitutional monarchy or republic, Westernization or Chinese essence with Western techniques. One young student puts it bluntly, the foreigners shot their way in with cannons. We must build our own cannons to shoot them out again. We must modernize or die. The simmering discontent boils over in 1900 with the Boxer Rebellion, when rural militias rise up against foreign influence, particularly missionaries. Initially supported by the Qing court under Empress Dowager Cixi, The rebellion becomes another disaster when a multinational force of 20,000 troops from 8 nations crushes the poorly armed Boxers and occupies Beijing. The resulting Boxer Protocol of 1901 forces China to pay yet another crippling indemnity, 450 million taels of silver, more than the government's annual revenue, to be paid over 39 years with interest. Foreign troops gain the right to be permanently stationed in Beijing. The final humiliation of the once mighty empire is complete. You're in Shanghai in 1909 talking with an elderly tea merchant who has lived through the entire century of humiliation. Despite his 80 years, his mind remains sharp, his memory clear. "I was a boy when the first Opium War began," he tells you, sipping his tea with a slightly trembling hand. "I remember the pride we felt, the certainty that the barbarians would be driven back into the sea. How could it be otherwise? We were the Middle Kingdom, the center of civilization. We were eternal." He gazes out the window at the European buildings dominating the skyline, at the foreign flags, at the evidence of Western dominance everywhere. "Now look at us. Foreigners rule our cities. Our emperor is a puppet. Our officials are corrupt. And still the opium flows. Though now we poison ourselves, rather than being poisoned only by others. We've become complicit in our own destruction. Is there no hope?" you ask, searching for something positive in the darkness of the situation. The old man is silent for a long moment. "There is always hope," he says finally, his voice carrying a weight of wisdom earned through suffering. "China is old. Dynasties rise and fall. Foreign conquerors come and go, but China remains. We have absorbed the Mongols, the Jurchen, the Manchus. Perhaps we will absorb these Western barbarians too in time." He couldn't know how prophetic his words would prove. Within 2 years of your conversation, the Qing dynasty will collapse. The 1911 Xinhai Revolution will end over 2,000 years of imperial rule. The last emperor, Puyi, just 6 years old, will abdicate. China will begin its long, painful transformation into a modern nation-state. But the legacy of opium and the unequal treaties will continue to shape China's development and its relations with the world for decades to come. The new Republic of China inherits a country devastated by addiction, divided by foreign spheres of influence, and traumatized by a century of humiliation. Even as the Republican government struggles to unite the country and resist Japanese aggression in the 1930s, opium remains a problem. Warlords grow rich from taxing the trade. The Japanese promote addiction in areas they occupy. Government efforts to suppress opium compete with the need for revenue and the reality of widespread corruption. Not until the communist victory in 1949 will China finally effectively end the opium epidemic that began with those British merchant ships in the early 19th century. Through harsh suppression, mass treatment programs, and fundamental social reorganization, the People's Republic will accomplish what the Qing dynasty could not, the eradication of widespread opium addiction. But the psychological scars remain forever. The century of humiliation becomes a foundational narrative in modern Chinese identity, taught in schools, referenced in speeches, embedded in the national consciousness. The lesson drawn is clear and stark. Weakness invites aggression. China must never again be vulnerable to foreign powers. China must never again be at the mercy of others. This brings us back to where we began, lying in your comfortable bed, reflecting on history. A nation that once dominated world trade, that considered itself the center of civilization, that needed nothing from barbarian states, was brought low not primarily by military defeat, but by a flower, by a drug that weakened it from within, while creating the very crisis that led to external intervention. The British writer Samuel Taylor Coleridge, himself an opium addict, once wrote of a stately pleasure dome in Xanadu, ancient China, where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man down to a sunless sea. His poem captures something of opium's allure, the beautiful dreams that lead to darkness. For China, opium created not pleasure domes, but national catastrophe. The sacred rivers of its civilization ran down to a sunless sea of addiction, humiliation, and decline. The celestial empire descended into a century of darkness from which it has only recently begun to emerge. As you lie in your comfortable bed, so different from the wooden platforms of those long-ago OPIUM dens, consider how something as seemingly insignificant as a flowering plant changed the course of world history. How the desire for profit overrode moral concerns. How one nation's weakness became another's opportunity for exploitation. The story of opium in China reminds us of human frailty, our vulnerability to addiction, whether to substances, power, or wealth. It shows how systems can fail gradually, almost imperceptibly, until suddenly the structures that seemed eternal crumble before our eyes. But it also contains hope. China, after a century of struggle, has reclaimed its sovereignty and rebuilt its strength. The nation that once fell to opium has risen again. Perhaps that's the final lesson of this dark historical tale. Empires fall, nations suffer, but people endure. They learn, they rebuild. Sometimes they even forgive, though they never forget. The weight of your eyelids grows heavier as you consider these things. Your breathing deepens naturally as you sink into the comfort of your mattress. Unlike those opium smokers of old China, your dreams will be your own, not those imposed by a drug or a foreign power. And as you drift toward sleep, remember that history's greatest lesson may be simply this: nothing lasts forever, not empires, not crises, not suffering. The world turns, night follows day, day follows night, and eventually even the darkest chapters come to an end. Sleep well knowing you've traveled through one of history's most consequential, yet often overlooked stories. How a flowering plant brought low the world's greatest empire. How the repercussions of that fall continue to shape our world today. The candle of consciousness flickers and dims. The story is told. Rest now in the peaceful darkness that follows.